European Union membership has been vital for us in the North East for many reasons, but one of the big reasons is about jobs in this region. As a region, we have a history of exporting more than we import to trade surplus, and that trade surplus is with the European Union, and there are over 100,000 jobs in the North East that directly depend on our trade with the rest of the European Union.
The European Union's also been extremely good for the environment on all sorts of different levels. We have legislation which a lot of people think comes from Westminster, from London, which actually doesn't. It comes from Brussels, it comes from the European Union, and in many ways the UK was seen as the dirty man of Europe before we joined the European Union, and as a result of having to follow European legislation on the environment, we've got cleaner beaches, we've got cleaner river, we've got cleaner air, and those environmental standards have been lifted as a result of being a member of the European Union. Another good thing about the European Union.
The North East, because of our history and the legacy of deindustrialisation, is unfortunately one of the more challenged regions and deprived regions of the UK. And as a result of that, we've benefited from massive inward investment through European regional development funds. Those regional development funds are allocated not on the basis of political whim or whether the people vote the right party locally, but allocated on the basis of economic need. And as a result, as a region, we have benefited from our EU membership pound for pound far more than we have contributed as local taxpayers.
The EU's been very good for peace in Europe. In 2012, this was acknowledged when the European Union won the Nobel Peace Prize, and that was because over the time that the European Union has existed, no country that's joined the European Union has ever gone to war against another member state. And if you think back over the 100 and 150 years of history prior to that, we had the Second World War, the First World War, and before that another 100 years of war. So the European continent had a long period of fighting, which has only really settled down since the creation of the European Union. And the fact that the European Union has in many ways been a peace project is one of the main reasons why I support the European Union.
One of the most tangible benefits of European Union membership is around the rights that have been acquired through European legislation, whether that is employment rights, rights in the situation of collective dismissals and ensuring information consultation. All of those rights at work have been legislated through European Union legislation. But rights aren't limited to the workplace. We also have rights through our European membership as consumers, through European consumer protection legislation, to ensure that if we buy something and it's not what we expected or we didn't get what we wanted, then we are protected. If we travel and something goes wrong, we as the consumer are protected in that situation. So rights are a really crucial part of what the European Union brings to people in a very tangible way here in the North East and across the whole of the UK.
So when I became an MEP, I was very keen to do some work on climate change, and I got this chance to work on a piece of legislation by the rather long title of land use change and forestry. And I worked on this for the Socialists in the Parliament, and as a result of getting some changes to the legislation, we've been able to enshrine in European law for the whole of the European Union protection of peat bogs, which contain a very large amount of carbon, and we have lots of peat in the northeast of England, up on the moors. And the legislation was also able to incentivise construction in wood, the building of tall, big buildings in wood, thereby replacing concrete. Concrete's responsible for around about 12% of global carbon emissions. So shifting into wood reduces carbon emissions and also at the same time sequestrates carbon in the wood, just as trees sequestrate carbon. So a double blow, if you like, against climate change as a result of that legislation, and I'm pleased to say that I'm responsible for that.
I think my biggest achievement, you have to look at it from 2 points of view. One is the thing that you do across Europe, but then it's also your achievement in your constituency. And so to start with the constituency, I think the extension of the metro to Sunderland and to the airport were things that I was directly involved in. And it was in the days when MEPs could actually lobby for money for the constituency. So whenever I get on the metro to the airport, I think I played a part in that. In terms of across Europe, I was appointed as the Parliament's spokesman and rapporteur on German unification. So when the Berlin Wall collapsed, I was sent on behalf of the European Parliament to meet the interim government and then to draft all of the legislation that allowed East Germany to become part of the European Union.
One of the early achievements which I was pleased with was tabling a resolution in the Parliament, which then got adopted by the Parliament as a whole, to establish a register of members' interests. Because before that there hadn't been such a register, and yet it was important obviously in a democratically elected institution that was covering a number of countries in Europe, to make sure that members were transparent and that people knew something about them and their background and what they were involved in.
My main work in all the years I was there was actually focused on research, because at that time the Commission was very concerned that in the information technology sector we were way behind the United States, and they had a proposal that if they all worked together they would achieve much more than they could working separately. So we had a program to do that, and the problem was that it was costing quite a bit of money in those days, and my job was to make sure that it got through all the parliamentary systems. So that's where it all started, and of course it developed into low carbon technologies after that, and a whole range of things. In fact, the research program now it's now called Horizon 2020. It's got an 80 billion euro budget, and Britain is the largest benefactor from it, almost as much as France and Germany put together.
I certainly think that as part of the team on the environment committee, we achieved a lot of other legislation, improve the quality of air, water and food, and to generally positive effect on people's health. We also do on chemicals, chemical safety, which is important to who's on tea time. I was an MEP for a huge chemical complex. Obviously, as a European, it is very involved in many legislation that we need to local industry and make sure it's very safe.
I guess one of the things that I was responsible for in the European Parliament was culture, media, sport and education. So I was the coordinator for the Socialist Party for that area of work, and one of the things that I was able to do was really highlight how important cultural and creative industries were to the North East economy, help support them, give money to them and advocate on their behalf. And really there was a flourishing at that time. It was the time when the Sage opened, it's the time when the Baltic opened, and cultural and creative economy really became the buzzword in the North East. And I hopefully played my part in doing that and connecting the North East with the European cultural and creative economy people.
Well, I was a member of the Employment Committee in the European Parliament and spent 30 years working on employment and social legislation. So there's a whole raft of laws actually, equality laws, equal treatment, maternity leave, parental leave, labour laws to give fixed-term contract workers, part-time workers, temporary agency workers, equivalent rights with full-time workers, anti-discrimination laws, health and safety law, a whole raft of legislation that I worked together with socialists from across the European Union, but also Greens and Christian Democrats who are right-thinking Christian Democrats, and some Liberals to put this legislation in place. And I think it's a proud legacy. Sadly, it won't be guaranteed to benefit British workers once Brexit happens, but it will continue to benefit the 200 million plus workers based in continental Europe. So I remain proud of that. I wish I could say that the guarantees would continue to apply in Britain, but who knows what a future government might do.
I guess my proudest moment as a trade unionist in Parliament was being a key part in the McDonald's campaign to try and get a ban on 0 hours contracts and to ensure that big multinational companies like McDonald's aren't ripping off the public by avoiding their tax, and seeing the European Commission take on McDonald's for their tax avoidance. And that's directly as a result of the workers in those companies who are often quite exploited standing up together and joining with us in the European Parliament to push forward action.
One of the things we did during the actual referendum campaign to draw attention to the many benefits of membership of the European Union was to highlight that our beaches have become cleaner as a result of EU legislation. So to highlight this, I did 5 swims in the North Sea, starting at Berwick and working our way in one day down the coast and ending up down at Redcar. And those 5 swims made it into the local and regional media and hopefully got the message across that we have cleaner beaches as a result of EU legislation. I have to say it was particularly cold doing the swims, but I think it was worthwhile.
I think the most emotional speech that I've had to give in the Parliament was after the referendum, actually after the negotiations had started on Brexit, in the Petitions Committee around citizens' rights. And I had to kind of stop as I was talking about how unfair I thought the people who didn't have a voice in the referendum, that their rights were actually being pulled back the furthest. You really felt the kind of whole committee rally behind me because I welled up and got quite emotional as I was speaking, and the reaction from people outside the Parliament was lovely as well.
I always remember going into a school, a school that wasn't having an easy time in the Northeast, and lots of students who were about to be excluded. They had a history of exclusions, and they introduced art into the curriculum for people who were about to be excluded, art and drama and dance and music. And I'll always remember going into this classroom where all of these kids, who basically really had a very, very difficult future ahead of them, really getting excited by the opportunities that the European Social Fund and the European Regional Development Fund had offered them in terms of money to develop their activities. And it saved a lot of kids from exclusion, and therefore it gave them an opportunity for the future. So there were lots of moments like that actually that you think, yeah, you can make a difference, it's really good.
Other things like going to speak at schools, do prize givings, talk to young people about what Europe was about. And of course, in those days, before anyone thought about leaving the European Union, for many young people, and it's still the case today, it's their aspiration to be part of something bigger. And so you could talk to people in primary schools or at universities about it, and I got a lot of satisfaction from that.
One of the key things that I came into Parliament pushing for was to push forward carbon capture and storage on Teesside. And we worked very closely with Teesside Collective, the chemicals and big manufacturing industry across Teesside, to push that up the political agenda. And as we leave the European Parliament, we're now seeing that whole agenda pushed forward from Westminster, and the money coming through to ensure that there'll be industrial carbon capture on Teesside. So I think that's one long-term thing which we'll see into the future delivering a benefit for the North East and for jobs and for the environment and for our communities.